So, have you ever been watching your favorite anime? Maybe just pausing on this absolutely beautifully animated frame, or really feeling a deeply emotional character expression, and wondered where did this distinct visual language actually begin? Because honestly, it's something we kind of take for granted today. But the massive, globally beloved aesthetic of modern anime actually has some incredibly deep, profound roots.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unearthing the pioneers who built the very foundations of manga and anime. We're going to peel back the layers and literally trace the DNA of this global art form right back to its original source.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the roots of anime, then look at the rewiring of the visual language. After that, we'll explore cinema on the page, unpack the medium's philosophy and emotional depth, and wrap up with its living legacy.
All right, let's jump right in. Section 1, the roots of anime and the godfathers of the medium. Now, to truly understand anime, we absolutely have to start with the legendary Osamu Tezuka. It's often said that he is essentially the Beatles of manga. Literally everything after him is somehow a response to his work. Before him, Japanese comics were, well, mostly just simple episodic entertainment for kids. But Tezuka came in and completely transformed them into a living, breathing art form. He is the literal god of manga. Just like the Beatles revolutionized music, he laid down the tracks that basically every single artist after him has been building on.
700. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering number of volumes Tezuka actually produced in his lifetime. Can you even imagine that level of output? But here's the thing, it wasn't just about volume. It was this restless, relentless creativity. Producing over 700 volumes allowed him to endlessly experiment, to totally redefine the medium. And incredibly, he still found the time to mentor the future legends of the industry.
So, one of his most brilliant innovations was the star system. And this is so cool. Instead of just abandoning his character designs when a story ended, Tezuka treated them like a troupe of Hollywood actors. He literally cast them in different roles across entirely different stories. It was absolute genius because it instantly built reader attachment and familiarity. And hey, if this sounds a little familiar to you, it's because this early multiverse approach directly inspired the interconnected concepts we see in massive modern franchises today, like the Fate series. Which perfectly sets up Section 2, rewiring the visual language and designing emotion. Okay, there's a really simple yet totally revolutionary equation that changed everything. We all know the classic big eyes trope in anime, right? Well, Tezuka is the one who popularized that. But it wasn't just to make things look cute. He realized that by using these simplified, bold shapes and massive, glassy eyes, he could create the ultimate visual shorthand for emotional resonance. A single tear, or even just a slight shift in an eyebrow, could communicate deep empathy and complex emotions way better than hyper-realistic anatomy ever could. Now, as manga inevitably made the leap to television screens, those visual rules really had to adapt. And this gave birth to what we call limited animation. You see, Tezuka's animation studio, Mushi Pro, well, they couldn't exactly afford Disney-level, frame-by-frame realism, so they leaned heavily into those high-contrast designs. They prioritized expression and dynamic storytelling over strict anatomical movement. And this cost-effective genius, it's the exact convention that actually made TV anime possible in the first place, and it gave the medium that unique, stylized look we all still love today. But, Tezuka wasn't the only pioneer out there. Masashi Tsubuyama introduced a massive visual shift of his own by blending vibrant action with incredible emotional subtlety. If you look at his work, notice how he used these bold, really dynamic sequences for pure energy, but then he'd seamlessly transition into much softer strokes for those quiet, introspective moments. His innovative paneling was just incredibly immersive, and it inspired an entirely new generation of animators to think deeply about how emotion could be drawn, not just written. Moving right along to Section 3, cinema on the page, and how we got moving pictures in print. This sparked a complete night and day shift in the medium. Before these pioneers, we basically just had simple, episodic gag comics. But in the post-Tezuka era, we suddenly start getting long-form arcs, incredibly complex sagas, and actual cinematic pacing. Tezuka's Ambassador Magma is a prime example of introducing this kind of long-form storytelling, and it directly paved the way for the massive, sprawling sagas we're used to now in shows like Dragon Ball.
So how exactly did they make a static piece of paper feel like a literal movie? Well, they borrowed directly from film. We're talking elaborate montages, quick cuts that totally dictate the rhythm of how you read, dramatic close-ups that act just like a camera zoom, and characters literally bursting right out of their frames. They made the pages move. And it's a trick that modern masters like Eiichiro Oda in One Piece absolutely still use heavily today to create those chaotic, super energetic spreads. And what's just as impressive as the visuals is the sheer scope of the stories being told. Tezuka was jumping genres like jazz. He fearlessly proved that manga could be absolutely anything. He didn't just stick to sci-fi. He wrote gripping medical dramas like Blackjack, super dark historical horror like Dororo, and even surreal, mature thrillers like Message to Adolf. He completely trusted his readers to handle complex themes across every genre imaginable. This incredible depth naturally leads us to Section 4, Philosophy and Emotional Depth, exploring the human condition. Anime is globally famous for its moral ambiguity and profound psychological depth. And guess what? That all starts right here. It's often said that every time a manga makes you cry over a robot or forces you to ponder ethics mid-battle, that's Tezuka's legacy whispering through the pages. Way before Attack on Titan made existential dread a mainstream pop culture phenomenon, these pioneers were out there tackling reincarnation, the deep flaws of humanity, and sci-fi empathy in absolute masterpieces like Astro Boy and Phoenix. Truly, every single tear you've shed over an animated character is a direct result of this legacy. And this depth builds even further with Masashi Tsuboyama. He essentially pioneered the anatomy of trauma in character development. He was the one who showed how a character's tragic background and past trauma deeply, deeply shape their current motivations. We see this exact narrative structure echoing so loudly today in massive blockbusters like My Hero Academia and Naruto, where a character's pain is quite literally the core of their power. Tezuka also wove some incredible spiritual depth into his work, brilliantly blending Buddhism with the art of manga. His epic series Buddha was just revolutionary. He didn't just dryly recount history, he completely humanized Siddhartha Gautama. He took incredibly complex themes of suffering, compassion, and the overall human experience and made them accessible through visually vibrant, super dynamic storytelling. It proved, once and for all, that comics could tackle the most profound philosophical questions of our very existence. And finally, Section 5, The Living Legacy, and how today's creators are inheriting the audacity. All right, let's connect the dots here and map out this unbroken DNA chain of thematic inspiration spanning the last 70 years. Just look at Blackjack, an absolute pioneer of medical ethics, which directly influenced the modern psychological thriller Monster. Or look at how Dororo laid the exact groundwork for blending dark comedy and gore, which you see everywhere right now in Chainsaw Man. And the nuanced psychological suffering we just talked about in Buddha, that heavily inspired the dark fantasy masterpiece Berserk. And the lineage just continues to expand. Astro Boy's Pinocchio-esque quest for humanity, that lives on beautifully in Full Metal Alchemist and Pluto. Tsuboyama's trauma-based arcs are basically the bedrock of My Hero Academia. And get this, incredible concepts like gender fluidity were being explored by Princess Knight way back in 1953. No way, right? Modern creators aren't just borrowing artistic techniques from these godfathers, they are inheriting their sheer creative audacity. They are continuing a long tradition of fearless storytelling. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative question. Which pioneer's fingerprints will you spot in your favorite anime? Because the next time you sit down to watch a series, I challenge you to look a little closer. Look for the cinematic cuts, the big expressive eyes, the deep dives into character trauma, and that fearless genre blending. The roots of this massive, beautiful tree are right there on the screen, just waiting to be recognized.